We have it backwards. You know, we think we're born with these kinks, these fetishes, these fantasies. That develops based on our lived experience. And we have to acknowledge that. And that's why I believe, you know, in sex therapy and sex coaching and the work that I do, because that's the most radical work you can do on yourself to distill your natural inclinations and, you know, be autonomous and really know yourself.
How do you help? How does someone, a man or a woman, tackle frequency and who should be doing the initiating?
I think these conversations are important to have out of the gates as soon as possible, like in a relationship or even before you go on a date. It's fun to actually discuss these things. Don't believe in ascribing a number to that. I think any sort of like, it should be this, it should be that. No.
So if the dude keeps getting rejected, what do you do?
It's indicative of such a larger issue. So it's up to the partner who wants to have sex more frequently to initiate that conversation.
So inversely, what are some of the barriers to intimacy?
Today, I mean, I think everyone tries to outcool each other. I've been guilty of it. I did this for years, you know, like, it's like...
He who cares the least wins.
Yeah. And what's the fucking point? It's like feigning indifference or apathy. It becomes like a Mexican standoff of emotions. Yeah, it comes back to a lot of women. They want all the perks of a monogamous relationship, but they're not realizing that a monogamous relationship also, you know, that epitomizes the connection between two people. It's not just not sleeping with other people. So what is in it for the man if he's not able to also be himself and express his desires, his needs authentically, his emotional spectrum?
Let's go on to oral.
I get asked this a lot, and you know, for tips and tricks, and I'm like, I can't give you a skill, right? It's like, you got to attune to your partner's needs. Like, every person is vastly different. What works for one person might not work at all or have the opposite effect on another partner.
Right. But in your experience, does monogamy work?
Yes. I've seen monogamy work far more than I've seen open relationships or polyamory work.
Wow.
Because there's something so magical about being in a world where we have an abundance of options and choice and deciding, you know, it's like the high fidelity thing, you know, we can run the algorithm with a multitude of people for the rest of our lives.
For sure.
But that's exhausting.
Right.
Deciding on one person, aligning on values and going to the depths of commitment with that person and acknowledging it's going to ebb and flow, it's going to be messy, but realizing it's going to be like that with anyone, right? You're gonna interface, you're gonna interact with those same challenges with any partner and any new partner. So, you know, to sustain long-term happiness and satisfaction, the studies show that monogamy is conducive to that.
We did that. I wanted to mention, because this is something that you and I are talking about, is the PlaySafe kit by Randox. And the PlaySafe kit is an incredible way to remember that life is play, but to play safe.
Yeah, I love that.
So this kit here is capable of giving you 9 STD results for $99. It's a urine sample mail-in kit. And obviously the thought here is that, you know, life is play. While you're playing out there, just play safe. We'll come back to that later as well, because I know that somebody in the staff asked, well, when should you actually take the test?
Yeah.
You know, they thought that we were gonna say that you take the test after sex. And I was like, I'm pretty sure Coral is thinking that you take the test way before sex and keep it safe. And I know that I'm gonna tie this back to your trip to Amsterdam and the sex worker and how clean they are and how often they test.
Yep.
And perhaps the PlaySafe kit could be even good for people in Amsterdam.
Closer than Amsterdam, I know a lot of women in, you know, porn and that are in the webcam at your OnlyFans space here, and they test on a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
Wow.
And men, by the way, that are in that space.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Geniuses podcast. I'm Alejo, your host. And today we have an exciting subject matter to cover: sex work, intimacy, and relationships. We have the distinct pleasure of having Coral Osborne, who is a sex and relationship coach. Her journey has taken her through that gamut to where she is in her journey now, back to exploring the depths of monogamy and the depths of intimacy with one partner. So no matter what your moral compass is here, I think this subject matter is going to be extremely illuminating. I know that for every one of us here in studio, we think that there's something in this subject matter that we're all excited to learn about. Thank you for joining us. And if it's okay with you, why don't you share a little bit how your journey began on your way to being a sex and relationship coach?
Sure. So I was raised by a mother who was a social worker, and I knew from a very young age that she had also been a victim of sexual abuse. So inherently, I was terrified of boys, and if I even had a little crush on a boy or a Teeny Bopper magazine, that was bad. And, if I came home in second grade and said so-and-so has a boyfriend, which is just holding hands at that and getting comfortable with the opposite sex, that was bad. So then when I was 12 or 13, I could no longer align with that perfectionism, and the natural inclinations, desires started to kind of rupture, and I split. And I went to the opposite side of the spectrum and became this very promiscuous teenager, and thought that that was me being liberated. It was kind of this, like, if you can't beat them, join them mentality. I can't get hurt by boys if I become one of the boys. And that carried over into my 20s. Even though I was in relationships, I just totally kind of surrendered my femininity, and I reached these intimacy impasses, as I call them, where, I was like, well, I'm so sexually liberated. Why can't I didn't even know the question of why can't I surpass this point, and why do I get in these toxic relationships? And I came out to LA, I had a startup, and I ran out of runway for my startup. I didn't have a worker's visa.
Which means money for anyone watching.
Yeah, which means money, exactly. And I was like, what am I gonna do? I can't pay my employees here. I'm not gonna be able to make rent.
Right.
And I'd always been, fascinated by sex, and was comfortable having casual sex. So I said, well, if I can do sex work, this will solve all of my problems. I'm comfortable with it. I'm going to try it once. If I'm not, I won't do it again.
And by sex work, you're referring to high-end escort?
Yes, yeah. And I'd always been fascinated by it. I'd done a ton of research and watched a lot of shows about it, and just went down the rabbit hole online. And I don't know what compelled me to it.
Well, it's compelling, and I have to say that I think that in LA, which is a very transactional town, it's hard to know what isn't and is sex work.
So here's the crazy thing is, I didn't even know that I got into it before I realized how prevalent it was. And then once I got into it, again, I didn't share this with anyone. No one knew. I lived a completely siphoned off, divided life. I never told anyone. And there were a lot of women, under the guise of being influencers or models, or having their own brands that they were launching, or even in grad school, what have you. And I was always like, how do they have so much money? Like, what am I missing here? Because I'm making like 40 grand a year, at 24. I don't understand. Yeah. And that's when I realized how prevalent it was,
right.
And not just in LA, in every major metropolis.
And let's be very clear. No, I think that neither one of us believes there should be shame around any of that, in that the moral compass is not for myself or you to decide.
It's so subjective. It's so nuanced, just like human beings, right? So I know a lot of women that are high-end escorts or doing OnlyFans, and they are in relationships that they want to be monogamous, but then they're also doing sex work on the side. And in their view, this is work, right? And then so they entered this relationship, and the man is kind of aware, maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, and she just wants to be accepted, right? So she seeks a relationship. And that's where you kind of lose me, because also here's the weird thing about me is I've never cheated in a relationship. I never did sex work when I was in a relationship. I was able to really keep those boundaries firm. Another thing is a lot of sex workers are great at boundaries, you know, because they have to practice those on a regular basis. So like people don't consider that, you know, you think sex work, you think dirty, you think morally, you know, deficit or void. And that's just not the case. It's so nuanced. Same with men that engage with sex workers. What's been really interesting to me, you know, because I didn't want to get in a relationship with anyone that would find out my past and be just dumbfounded by it, and it would blow their world up. So I like to engage with just meeting anyone new, ask them what their thoughts are around OnlyFans or escorting, or send them an article and see how they respond to it. And more often than not, you'll see the men that would get like very defensive and like, oh, these women aren't even humans. Those are the ones that you have to watch out for, right?
Well, it's very interesting because I think one of the things that, as I've followed you in your online presence, I've noticed that everything that you are posting and talking about, you have a unique perspective on and a greater depth of insight and intuition. And I think that that's only possible by having been through the journey that you have had. And so thank you for being so brave to come on the show. And thank you for being so brave as to help us understand. I'm super fascinated. I want to know more about sex work. I know that you were an advocate for sex workers, and I know that you've just recently gone to Amsterdam to explore the legalities of how Amsterdam is doing it. But also, I know that you believe that sex work has saved a lot of marriages, and I believe that your journey has given you a unique perspective to be able to share communication strategies for relationships and partnerships that want to improve and want to have monogamy as their goal post. So if it's okay with you, let's step into that journey.
Yeah, so I'm an advocate of sex work because, yeah, I do believe that it's saved a lot of marriages. I don't believe in leading with going to an escort at all. I mean, people just lack communication skills. They lack vulnerability and, you know, the ability to de-shamify. A friend of mine recently said to me, because I was like, well, what, you know, well, I'm 35, why haven't I, you know, found this relationship, this person yet? Is it me? And to be fair, honestly, it was me up until like recently when I came into this work and had these revelations that I had. And, you know, he said, well, Coral, I think you're actually highly perceptive. So it takes people, you know, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years to find out about their partners. You can't unsee based on your lived experience. So you just go right into the deep end, and that's true. So most people want to be seen, but not that part, right? It's like they want to control their idyllic sense of self.
When you say that part, do you mean the perverse part that is erotic and sexual?
That's one of the components. What's important to recognize is that we sexualize our trauma. So we should not traumatize our sexuality. And, you know, there's the erotic aphrodisiacs, which need to be discussed. So there's the positive emotions, which are happiness, you know, contentment, joy. Then you go into the present embodied emotions, which is love, you know, compassion. And then you have the unexpected aphrodisiacs, or the negative emotions, which are shame, anxiety, fear, guilt, humiliation, revenge.
So when you say aphrodisiacs, do you mean fetish?
That covers everything from fantasy to fetish to kinks. So I'll give you an example that will probably, hopefully tie this all together. So there was this case study, it's in a book called The Erotic Mind by Jack Moran, a famous sex therapist. And he had this husband and wife come in, and the wife had caught the husband watching incest porn, and she freaked out. She was like, you have a sister and a father, and this is the type of porn you're watching. Like, what, you want to have sex with your sister and your father? And which could be pretty shocking, right? When we see what types of porn and preferences that our partner has. But no one really wants to unpack that. So they go in and they basically find out that his father, the husband's father, had remarried when he was 12 years old. And then he had a child with the stepmother, and that child was completely excluded in any sort of, baseball games or going to the fair, and he didn't play with his son anymore. He just played with the young daughter that he had. The son felt completely isolated, so by watching this pornography, he sexualized that trauma, and it was through repetition with agency. So if it's like a father and son with daughter, he felt included, he felt seen, so it's not that we have it backwards. We think we're born with these kinks, these fetishes, these fantasies. That develops based on our lived experience, and we have to acknowledge that. And that's why I believe, in sex therapy and sex coaching and the work that I do, because that's the most radical work you can do on yourself to distill your natural inclinations and, be autonomous and really know yourself. I think we have it backwards, in society.
That's super powerful, because I know that so much of our society is based on the function of marriage and or divorce. And it seems that family values are declining because we're divorcing. Many would say that our culture has learned to not like, men and women have learned to not like each other. And so it's interesting that if we help relationships be more sexual or communicate more within the context of their relationship, that we may prevent more divorce. And so it's a very brave area for you to undertake, and a very important area. I know that you and I both believe that sex is like food or water, and I know that the Chinese culture refers to it as food and or water, that you can't live without it.
Yeah.
And I think most of us would agree that we live life very much for sex. So I'm super fascinated about your experiences. I know that you have understood men in a different way. What is your insight on men based on sex work?
Oh my God. So wildly different than what you'd assume it to be. The thing about sex work is when you meet a man in a transactional environment, that's what it is as a baseline, right? So there's no facade, there's no masking what it is. So what's shared with you in that period of time is going to be radically honest. They're going to tell you things that they would never tell their partner, their therapist, their best friend, their family member, because it's already just baseline sex. So anything beyond that is at their own discretion. So when I learned about, the male psyche, and again, their desire to be seen, heard, accepted, feel safe, was profound. The major thing is a lot of them try to broach the subject of sex and intimacy with their partners, and their partners would shut them down, right? And if you're making constant bids at your partner and trying to initiate sex and connection on a nightly, weekly basis, and they're just saying, not in the mood, that's indicative of your inability to communicate on every level. So if your partner, in most cases, the woman is recurrently shutting you down, then what do you think is going to happen, right? So what was really interesting to me is I saw a lot of great men that really, that's the only place they knew to turn to. And they love their partners. They talk about how they love their partners, and they didn't know what else to do. And then conversely, I know loyal men who are monogamous who are shitty partners. And then there's a whole nuance in between. It's just not finite. And I myself have always been monogamous. But realizing it's not a one size fits all. I can't ascribe, I don't have a fixed opinion on any of this. It's so fluid. But I'll definitely say, what I learned about men and the male psyche was just so vast.
Who initiates and frequency seems to be a very big subject matter that my friends come to me wondering, they're like, well, how often should we be having sex? Because I might not be getting it as much as I need, et cetera, et cetera. And the couple is not communicating about frequency. How do you help? How does someone, a man or a woman, tackle frequency, and who should be doing the initiating?
I think these conversations are important to have out of the gates as soon as possible, like in a relationship or even before you go on a date. It's fun to actually discuss these things, to see how open-minded, your partner is going into a relationship. But frequency, I don't believe in ascribing a number to that. I think any sort of like, it should be this, it should be that. No, it's different strokes for different folks, like quite literally. And it depends on the standard that you set as a couple. So,
So if the dude keeps getting rejected, what do you do? What does he do? So he's clearly thinking like, okay, we should be having sex 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And her frequency is like, I think we should only be having sex once a week.
Yeah.
So she rejects him 4 out of 5, and what does he do?
So that's called desire discrepancy, and that is, 4 out of 5 isn't bad. That's kind of normal. It also depends on the length of the relationship.
Sure, 4 out of 5, I would agree.
Yeah.
It's good.
I was like,
1 out of 5 is what I meant.
Yeah.
If he's getting 1 out of 5.
Yeah, again, it's indicative of such a larger issue. So it's up to the partner who wants to have sex more frequently to initiate that conversation.
Okay.
You have to go about it as in you're not entitled to this. Sex is emotional, but most men feel love through sex. That's how they connect, right? And then women have this aversion to it where it's like, oh, you just want sex. No, that's how they feel love too. So they have to broach that subject, with compassion and create a safe space for their partner to respond to that. Okay, like, why don't you feel comfortable? Is it just you're not in the mood, or maybe they don't feel sexy? Maybe they don't feel like they're being courted. Maybe their partner, their husband, isn't asking them questions anymore, doesn't seem to want to get to know them. Then yeah, of course their partner is going to pull back. They don't feel safe, right?
Safety seems like such a big thing.
It's huge. I mean, I see this happen so much where I'll get asked like, well, how do you have a threesome with your partner? I'm like, okay, have you been dating for at least 3 years, and are you completely at equilibrium and mutuality in your relationship? Like, or is this one person pushing it? Like, I owe him a threesome. I owe her a threesome. No, you should never why? You should never lead with that. So safety is major. Like, that gives you freedom of expression.
Let's say there's safety.
Yeah.
How does a couple maintain intimacy after year 3? How do they stay sexually attracted to each other when you have operational requirements every day and you're more like a roommate?
Yeah, this is why I think autonomy and individuation is so important. When we meet someone new, we're inclined to connect, we're inclined to attach to them, but the more you maintain your own sense of agency and your own passions and pursuits. And that doesn't mean a woman has to have a career and, be A-type and ever like what gets her going beyond the relationship? What gets him going beyond the relationship? And having that fills your bucket back up between the two of you.
It's that old Jerry Maguire thing, right? Like, you can't complete me. I have to be completed and a joyful, responsible person for my own state of being, and then come to another person. Yes,
and I'll say with that, the biggest fundamental I've seen in keeping long-term attraction is, well, there's a couple. You have to really like the person. If it's just like, oh, this person's so fucking hot, that's not gonna hold the two of you together. That's gonna wear thin, right? You have to really like the person. You have to be friends. And then you have to have insatiable curiosity. That is the biggest turn on, the biggest arousal point. If someone's insatiably curious, not only are they going to be like that with their partners.
And you don't just mean sexually.
No,
okay.
Just about getting
insatiably curious about each other.
Yes, about life, about other, about people's, about the human psyche, about relational dynamics, about whatever recreational or career pursuits they have. Are they constantly wanting to grow and evolve? That is very, very attractive, when it's you want to peel back the layers of someone or something, and that doesn't scare the other person.
So inversely, what are some of the barriers to intimacy?
Today, I think everyone tries to outcool each other. I've been guilty of it. I did this for years, like, it's like.
He who cares the least wins.
Yeah. And what's the fucking point? It's like feigning indifference or apathy.
To me, it's a bad strategy. You're like, wait a minute, let's feel the least amount.
Yeah, exactly. I was definitely like that. It becomes like a Mexican standoff of emotions. And then it wasn't until in a relationship that I experienced my partner being complete, like, I tried to provoke him in this way by telling him about a past sexual experience I'd had. Oh, yeah. And instead of, acting standoffish or ghosting or, one-upping me, he was like, this made me feel this way. I felt, I realized I actually cared about you more than I thought I did. I felt kind of cut by the way you described this. Mm-hmm. I felt like you got disrespected in this casual encounter. And that made me go from like, about this person to holy shit, by someone leading with their vulnerability. Mm-hmm. I was just like glommed onto him. Like after that, it was just the radical vulnerability, begets radical intimacy. When people lead with their authentic selves, it's shocking the response you get. Water does rise to its level.
I completely agree, and I know that you have a Brene Brown quote.
Yeah, this was a pivotal read for me. So Brene Brown had the husband of a fan of hers go up to her at the end of a book signing and said, I love everything you're doing for women, but what about men and their shame and their vulnerability? And he said, my wife and daughters would rather see me die on my white horse than fall off of it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, holy shit, that embodies the whole experience. Which
comes back to what we're learning here, is that radical vulnerability and honesty in communication as a derivative of personal growth, because as a personal growth leads you to emotional intelligence, which leads you to understand that, say you share a story with me that is your bid at a manipulation, and I come at you with radical vulnerability, and I hold that up to you, you all of a sudden are going to bond with me even more. Mm-hmm. And that opens the door to that eroticism and that intimacy because we're creating safety.
Yes, but we do have to be careful about that. There's no, I always say there's 4 ways to know someone, right? It's what they say about themselves, what other people say about them, their actions, and time. And time we cannot expedite, right? So someone can have all those 3 pillars, and then a year in, 5 years in, they can just shift. And that's just the reality. So it comes down to a leap of faith. If we really want love, if we really want to connect with someone, it comes down to a leap of faith.
Let me circle back to the quote, the Brene Brown quote, because I think we can explore the thought that's coming out of that, and that men can't be honest with their wives.
Yeah.
But they were able to be honest with you because you and they had a different dynamic. And so you can share with the rest of us what your learning was when they were being that honest. When men were being that honest, what can you tell the wives out there and the girlfriends out there that only you can as a result of your experience? What do they need to know as to what their men need and want?
They want to feel safe as well, to be seen as multi-dimensional individuals. And I always say, if you're afraid to ask the questions, then you're afraid of the answers, right? So I put myself in a situation where I wasn't afraid to ask questions, and therefore, I was able to accept people's truths. Mm-hmm. And, women, again, were leading with kind of this is definitely a response to the Me Too movement and the victim, culture that we've kind of cultivated. We're ascribing one identity to every man. It's this kind of blanket approach where it's so much more nuanced than that. My advice to women is to really prepare yourself and to be self-aware enough to enter a relationship. If you are going to get married, if you want a family, do the work on yourself and sit with the discomfort of the ebbs and flows of a relationship. Like, can I handle this? What's my truth? What will I do, if my partner doesn't want to sleep with me after this? Like, am I comfortable enough to have these conversations? And then you also have to find a partner that's willing to meet you where you're at as well. Yeah, it comes back to a lot of women. They want all the perks of a monogamous relationship, but they're not realizing that a monogamous relationship also, that epitomizes the connection between two people. It's not just not sleeping with other people, right?
Right.
So what is in it for the man if he's not able to also be himself and express his desires, his needs authentically, his emotional spectrum?
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of work and compromise and sacrifice that goes with having a successful relationship.
And real intimacy is messy. It's not sexy, right? It's not. Like, you're going to reach points where the only way out is through, especially in long-term relationships. And I came up against this a while ago, and I remember my therapist saying, because I had still have the higher sex drive. Shocker, I know. Yeah. And his desires started to waver, but I was like, what do I do? Because my leverage from when we started the relationship seems to be gone. In most, relationships, they talk about desire discrepancy. It's the men wanting more sex than the woman. So there's a lot of shame around that as a woman too. And she's like, what you need to do is you have to get really, really vulnerable. She said, you have to have that conversation, and then you have to kind of dissect the intimacy. You have to get into going slow, building it from scratch. And again, even taking sex off the table. So you're not like, why don't you have sex with me? You don't love me anymore, blah, blah, blah. And attacking is going to just create defensiveness. And then it's this standoff and it gets you nowhere. So approaching it from a compassionate angle is integral to coming out the other side. And once you do that and dissect it and break it down to this kind of extreme intimacy and love making and tantric sex and exploring that and all the layers of that, then you have the playroom to kind of build it back up to this crazy thing if you want.
Which is the good stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So we're about to take a turn and discuss how couples can ignite passion, perhaps what the role of foreplay is, and or how a couple might make their sex life exciting and new.
I think it falls under the umbrella of communication as well. The three fundamentals of sexual and emotional intimacy are communication, trust, and safety, right? They're both intrinsic.
Yeah.
So seeing how someone responds to addressing, sexual safety and taking a STI test and your results is also gauging their open-mindedness. If they get defensive, if they get their back up, it's not the kind of partner that I want to have.
Yeah, for sure.
That tells you so much about someone.
Yeah.
Again, sex is a metaphor for life. It's symbolic of how we are in all components of our world, right? So how someone responds to that request will tell you how they respond to a lot of more difficult issues.
I love that thought because I always look at a frequency. So basically, you can choose to play true C, or you can choose to play a harmonic at a frequency that's healing or sexual or vibrant, or you can choose to play a frequency that's low.
Yeah.
And so therefore, every action in your life is in tune with a singular linear frequency that you've chosen.
Yes.
So the frequency of sex, or the frequency of trust, or the frequency of personal development and emotional intelligence seem to me to all be one harmonic.
Yeah.
That you need to have all of those in order to have great sex.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have this primal novelty sex, right? And if we look at our peak sexual experiences, a lot of us think back to that stranger on that vacation we were on, whatever, the person that we kind of hated, and it's like we'd never see again. We wouldn't ever want to date them, but it was just this peak erotic experience. But in long-term relationships and pertaining to long-term satisfaction and happiness, you do need all of those pillars.
Let me ask you something. When does someone go to a sex worker then? Because if we've painted this picture of excellence, right? I mean, this is a very high bar to set, right? It means that you have to actually be your true and best authentic self.
Yeah.
So when does someone go to a sex worker? In what scenario?
That varies. You know, I would say there's kind of two extremes. There is the, you know, committed man that, again, has been making bids at his partner and being rejected on an ongoing basis, or they're afraid to have the conversation in the first place, and their partner isn't initiating or engaging with them. So rather than have the conversation, they just default to kind of living this, again, siphoned off, compartmentalized life. I have my sex here, and, you know, I have my family here, which again is not conducive to long-term sanity, in my opinion. And then you have the like pathological, you know, sex guy, which that's a very other side of the spectrum, and that's just someone that has compulsive sexual behavior that like thrives on the novelty. You know, it goes back to those dark aphrodisiacs and the novelty, the not supposed to, the anxiety around it, the shame. So those are two kind of like opposing pillars, but that's what I found to be the most common.
So kind of like the guy who's not getting it enough and wants to keep life together.
Yeah, it's fundamental need. So yeah.
It's like, hey, I need to drink and eat.
Yes.
I'm not getting that at home.
Yeah.
And the other guy is sort of like the darker fetish exploration. Is there a place where those two meet?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. An analogy I like to use is sex is like, it's like eating, right? So sometimes we want McDonald's. Sometimes we just really crave McDonald's, and we want a Big Mac and a McFlurry.
Right.
And then it's like, it's the only thing we can't stop thinking about it. And then we have it and we're like, oh, I feel sick.
Yeah.
Like,
don't want
well,
that
I
again.
can't eat that every day. No, I'm good. Ugh.
Yeah.
You know, and then you spend the next week or two working it off before you get back to your baseline. Or it's like a Michelin star, where it's this like euphoric, multi-dimensional experience, you know? And exploring all the dimensions of like, wow, like we're starting with this foreplay, this, you know, and then we're having our main course, then the amuse-bouche, the dessert, and like it's all these layers.
So are we saying that in order to achieve that, which sounds awesome,
Yeah.
right? This Michelin star meal that has all the layers of eroticism, but intimacy, you have to do that other thing, which is the personal work. You have to have the truly authentic self in order to get that. Can you create that scenario at home? Is I guess what I'm saying, so that you don't have to go to a sex worker. How does the average person get the ultimate sexual home life within their relationship?
Well, they have to start with the fundamentals of their relationship. Like it ends with sex. It never leads with sex, right? Sex is a symptom of the underlying issues. So, you know, how is their communication, and what trauma, uppercase or lowercase t trauma, did they come into the relationship with? What's their relational experience? You know, what were their views around sex growing up? Was it a tool that they used to get what they wanted? Or was it something that they felt entitled to if you're a male? So going into a relationship with that array of knowledge is important.
Let me see if I can be sort of the audience member and privileged to have you. So let's say you've done the work and you're at home, but you have a fetish now.
Yeah.
And not like out there fetish. And I know that we're gonna discuss sex toys. That's not a very out there thing. Or I know that that anal sex has become very much a part of the basic mainstay in terms of the menu items that the average couple has. But let's say in a couple, in a relationship where someone's only approaching the missionary position, or doesn't have like, it's not gonna 69, or how does that couple, let's say the male or the female has done the work, how do they bridge the divide? How do they get each other closer to having those, cursory fetishes met or needs. McDonald's,
Right.
to borrow the analogy.
Right.
How do you get McDonald's at home once in a while?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if your partner is, if you want that sexual landscape to change, you have to set the stage, right? So leading by example. So if I were the one that wanted to have my kink or my fetish met, I would start by saying, this is something that really turns me on, and seeing how they respond to that. And then to get your partner to engage with you in that, people respond to their ideal sense of self or their projected ideal sense of self. So when that behavior aligns with that projection is when you can get someone to meet you where you're at. So say I'm like, do you consider yourself adventurous? And you'll say, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, this would be really hot if we tried this new adventurous thing. You appeal to that sense of self in them, or I really love the fact that you're vulnerable and you're intimate about this. So like, what if we appeal to that?
The question is, what are tips for discussing fantasies and kinks, right? So let's say someone has a fetish or a fantasy or a kink, and they don't know exactly how to broach that with their partner. Yeah. Do you have any tips or insights?
Yeah, it depends on what it is too, right? And there's a difference between liking and wanting. You can have a fantasy that you don't want to act on. But if it's something that you do want to act on...
You mean the partner doesn't want to act on?
No, or you as an individual, you could think about something that gets you aroused, but it's not something you actually want to practice with your partner.
Right.
And I can go off on that. But realizing as the partner, that's, I find this in a lot of, traditional hetero romantic dynamics where a male will suggest something, maybe he wants a prostate play, right? Uh-huh. And realizing that your partner, as a female, is vulnerable enough to include you in on that, and that's a compliment, right? Like, that should bring you closer together.
100%.
Like, that is so it's important to de-shamify each other's kinks and fetishes too.
So someone wants to have prostate play. They have a partner who they're concerned might find that, might judge them, might think of them as less. But that partner should have the confidence to ask for it, believing that it will ultimately bring them closer.
Yes. You have to ask for what you want. You have to ask for what you want. You don't know until you ask for what you want. It's so hard to do. It sounds so easy. It sounds so easy, but it's really hard. Yeah. Because you don't, again, if you're afraid to ask the questions, you're afraid of the answers. Yeah. And you might not get the answer. So
then you go to the sex worker because you're not asking your partner.
Yes. And you might not get the answer that you want right away. And you also have to be willing to accept that.
And what if the partner says no? Says, hey, I like your idea here, but not so much.
I would ask, how important is it? How important is it? Because no is obviously a form of rejection, and that rejection sexually can mean rejection across the board. So is this a fixed no, or is this I've never done it, and I don't want to, but maybe I could learn more about this. And what does this mean to you? And then for the partner initiating this conversation, addressing what it means to them is imperative.
Brilliant. Okay, so the person who's doing the asking has to ask about how hard of a no is this.
Yeah.
And also has to be able to express how important it is.
Yes.
And then the relationship, I guess, has to navigate that.
Yeah.
Because that is awfully authentic.
Yeah, I know.
That's really courageous and brave. Yeah. I'm not sure everybody can do that.
Yeah, well, have you heard of the Erotic blueprint?
No.
Okay, so this is like the 5 love languages of sex.
Okay.
So there is energetic, which is like push and pull, tension, creating that kind of cat and mouse energy.
So at the bar.
Yeah.
When you see someone.
Yeah, but that can transfer to so many other things, okay. Right? There is sensual, which is, I mean, the baseline could be like, you know, you like a massage to relax and to get in the mood. A lot of women are predominantly sensual. There's sexual, which is straight up like penetration. Most men are predominantly sexual. There is kinky, which isn't just pertaining to, you know, the physical kink. It can also be psychological kink, right?
So important.
Yeah, and then there is the shapeshifter, which they can go from one to the other. They intuit their partner's needs. So what I like to do with a new partner, and I recommend to people entering relationships, or even those that have been in long-term relationships, it's a quiz you can take online. And it tells you what your dominant style is. So like, I think, you know, I'm like leading energetic. So, you know, like I can't just have sex with someone. That's boring and passe to me. I need a little mental play. I need to feel like it's not too easy. My second one is shapeshifter. I can adapt to people's needs, you know, quite easy. And that turns me on. Reading someone, getting kind of inside of the way that they think and they feel. And then, you know, kinky. So it's like people, and you see the percentage breakdown of what each person is. So having that kind of as an unintimidating way to broach what your sexual preferences are is so safe and brilliant.
I love it. So this is the
erotic blueprint.
The erotic
love languages of sex.
blueprint.
Yeah.
And the erotic blueprint has these 5 types of personas. You can do an online quiz to determine which is your leading persona.
Yeah.
You are leading energetic.
Hence why I like radical intimacy too. It's like, if it's just, you know, novelty sex, it wears thin for me. It's predictable.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, the other thing that I find fascinating about your journey is that, you know, I saw you post that after you've slept with the shiniest, prettiest people, and that you've all the hot ones, now what?
If you are just focused on fulfilling your desires, that encompasses only 10% of your overall happiness, which people have so backwards. So I reached a point where I would get that quick fix of dopamine, and then I would meet someone I liked, and I would not know how to be in a relationship. And I also existed and thrived on external validation by sheer nature of you know, my past and what I'd done, which I'll say about sex work, it can be quite insidious, you know, in terms of your perceived value of self. So I couldn't get that same thrill anymore. You know, I'd be doing the same things. I'd meet someone new. I would, you know, play this chase game and then pull away, and then it just became predictable and boring to me.
Yeah, because how do you get that leading energetic hit again, right? Because the self-esteem, the perceived value of self is based on what you look like and this cat and mouse. So to move through into intimacy and fundamentally realize that the exploration of just feeding that dopamine hit leads to a feeling of emptiness, and then you have to actually now find a relationship and get really intimate and really vulnerable. I think that's crazy. I think it's brilliant that you came to that discovery. So I know that we're about to move into some of the fun stuff, and I know that we just discussed that if you want to get into fantasies, if you want to get into kinks, try appealing to that individual's partner's ideal self-image. The example you used was, are you adventurous? So speaking of adventurous, first on the subject here is anal. I mean, you did post on this and I thought it was amazing. I was so impressed. I forwarded on to my partner.
Yeah.
I will confess, this is an area of play that I think is fun, is interesting, and I know a lot of guys that find it fun and interesting. And so help everyone out.
Okay, I have so much to say about this. So the reason, let's just cover why men like anal in the first place, right? It has to do, not because it feels better, right? That's not the reason. Power dynamics. And for me, as the receiver, it's like, this is a boyfriend privilege. This is something I'm going to do with someone that I feel very safe and connected with. And that's where that novelty for the male lies as well, right? It's like, if this woman is willing to do this with me, this means I have conquered this.
Yes.
She thinks of me as exceptional, as above all the rest. So we have to acknowledge, again, the metaphorical value of what anal means. It's not just, I want to do this act. Like, well, let's dissect what that means to them, right? And then in terms of getting there, like, anal can be the most painful thing in the entire world if you don't go about it the right way, or it can be the most pleasureful, experience.
For real? Like, it can be pleasurable?
Yeah, I mean, it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone. Dr. Evan Goldstein, who's the butt doctor, talks about how there's 3 different types of anuses, and so anatomically, it's not for everyone, and you have to be able to acknowledge that. With your partner, might not be comfortable, it might always be painful, but generally, there's safe ways to go about trying that. So, what I recommend is getting like a 5-tier anal training kit. You start with the smallest one. You want to get 3.5% lidocaine lube, and then a syringe, an anal syringe, which they make. You can order all this off of Amazon. And then you slowly work your way up to this. So do not just go straight to a partner. For so many reasons, you want to be comfortable enough with it, and physically you want to know that you can actually ease into this and take this. So you start with the smallest bug, and you build your way up, and this sounds ridiculous, but you can literally do the dishes, watch TV, or when you're reading in bed at night, and just keep it in there. So it's like you're adjusting to it, and do a slow and gradual build. And then when you actually decide to have anal sex with a partner, don't use the lidocaine, because that has desensitized you. So you want to switch to the silicone lubricant. And that will make that sensation more alive, but you need to build up your tolerance too. And then I really encourage Epsom salt baths.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And this is I know that in prostate health for men, this is becoming a very big thing in terms of understanding how to have an internal massager that hits the prostate or gets close to the prostate. So I know that learning about insertion and relaxation and all these things is becoming important for both sides, men and women.
Yeah.
Which might be a good time actually to talk about the PlaySafe kit.
Yes.
So, I love this product because it confirms that life is play.
Yeah.
And suggests that enjoy life, be playful, but suggests that you play safe.
Yeah.
And it is a product by Randox, been in business for 42 years out of the United Kingdom. They do some brilliant health checks here in the USA, which I'll actually talk about in a second. But the PlaySafe kit is $99, and it gets you 9 STD tests, discreet. It's an at-home kit, 1 urine sample, and tests 9 of the most common STDs, which allows you to play safe. And a little bit about Randox. Randox has a lab here now in the Santa Monica area in Los Angeles, California, and they do 80 blood tests for $395, and that's the baseline plus. The concept being that when you are healthy and seeking a longer, healthier life, hopefully full of sex, you want to establish your baseline with 80 blood tests, look at markers that might suggest maybe some lifestyle changes. Then you can add a protocol, and that's why it's called Baseline Plus Protocol. Let's say you're following Andrew Huberman or you're doing the Brian Johnson protocol. You now take the protocol over the next 90 days and you run your test again. And you start to look at those markers and to see that you're hitting your targets for longevity and pro-aging. So they have a second product called the Health Span, and the Health Span allows you to do that first baseline test plus the second test for $695. And then they finally have their performance package, which is something that someone like myself is interested in, where I did my baseline, and then I have a protocol and interventions let's say for some element of health, the performance package allows me to do day 1, day 90, and day 180 for $9.95. And these 80 blood tests, we have talked to various doctors. The CPT codes on them are, $3,000. So if you're going to run them individually, it would cost $3,000.
See, I love this because it's like radical honesty with yourself, right?
Right.
This all ties into same thing with partnership. Like keep yourself in check. Like the accountability, factor is there. It's like,
you really can't run from this.
No.
I tried because I thought, one of the doctors that I talked to, Dr. Gruen, as you and I discussed, I do 90 minutes of yoga and I do handstands, and I thought I was healthy. And then I did the 80 blood tests and I saw that I was eating too many fries. I saw that I was probably drinking too much alcohol. Yeah. I saw, so I couldn't hide from that data.
Yes.
So then I made the changes and it actually woke me up, and I ran the test again. I did the health span package and I was like, wow, I made such huge improvements and so much, like I lost 10 pounds, so much. Anyway.
Again, test and assess, right? Which goes for relationships too.
Test and assess.
Test and assess. Like
love it.
Growth mindset. This is all intrinsic.
So before you start dating, you're like, so what are your thoughts on?
Oh my God. Again, with the insatiable curiosity, I love questions. I think questions are such a lost art too. And I know you can relate to me on this because here you were asking me questions. Yeah. But that insatiable curiosity is just the benchmark of a healthy relationship, of a healthy sex life, healthy friendships, just being autonomous, everything.
I think you have to write a book. And I think one of the, so I think we've got some of your chapters outlined in this vlog, right? Test and assess.
Yeah.
Insatiable curiosity, right? Radical authenticity.
Yeah.
So I actually really think you should write a book. And I want this day here today to catch those sparks of genius that I see in your online presence. And I invite everyone to follow Coral. Her online messaging is incredible. As I said, I sent one on to my partner. So I genuinely believe that what you're saying is true because I've seen it in my life. And this is, we're celebrating our 5th year. I've done the work.
Yeah.
Let's go on to oral. So, and I know it's both BJ's and oral.
Yeah.
So talk to us, help us.
Okay, well, I get asked this a lot and, for tips and tricks. And I'm like, I can't give you a skill, right? It's like, you got to attune to your partner's needs. Like every person is vastly different. And that's coming from someone that's been with a lot of people. What works for one person might not work at all or have the opposite effect on another partner.
Right.
So the most important thing, again, is communication and attuning to someone's needs and realizing that not everybody body is the same, different strokes for different folks, but a willingness to also do it. Again, like if your partner doesn't, if your wife, girlfriend does not like giving blowjobs, you better be okay with that going into it because it's not going to get better.
Right.
So you have to address those head on.
But what about the bait and switch, right? Where you've made your needs clear and you're like, hey, BJs are super important and I, want it aggressive and I want you to do the huatui, the huatui girl, and then the partner, agrees before the relationship and a couple years in, huatui is out the door.
That is a real issue. The bait and switch. Obviously that's predominant with women baiting and switching. And then, men are shamed and they're kind of gaslit into thinking like, am I wrong for then wanting this? Like, does this mean I don't respect my wife or my girlfriend if I want? No, it doesn't. You have to have that conversation. And women have to recognize, like, you know what? I don't love brushing my teeth at night, okay? I don't love taking the trash out. Do I have to do it, like, as part of a functioning into my daily life? Yes. If you go through the motions, that will get you being turned on by it. That makes sense,
sure, yeah.
Right? Like, if you're not in the mood, and then your partner starts, like, touching you, caressing you, then you will, more often than not, get into the mood. So it's just, it is something that your partner should definitely not hold against you. You know, that's a fundamental need.
It's like, a relationship contract almost.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens is when stuff that was in the original contract is taken off, I think a lot of men and women then start to disappear.
Yes.
And they start to disappear into an area of limbo where they want to be a good person in a relationship, but have lost their sense of self. They're like, well, I'm not getting BJs, I'm not having sex, but I want to be a good guy. And that's where I think people are ending up either breaking up the relationship, which is no good for anybody, especially if it's a marriage, because now we have divorce, we have children affected, or people go into the sex worker, and then that creates a sense of dishonesty within the individual going to the sex worker sometimes. And then the third scenario is obviously, affairs and which is even more destructive, or just this death of sex in a relationship.
Yeah, and that's why I think that having, monthly or at least quarterly check-ins in a relationship, because we're always growing and the goalpost is always moving. Who I was even 2 years ago is vastly different than who I am now, for the better. Hopefully we're growing.
So can that be a chapter in your book, the relationship contract?
Yeah.
Can you make it so that what you kind of, the tent poles that you set early on are sort of a commitment to maintain, so that intimacy doesn't go off and die in a marriage?
Absolutely, those pillars. Yeah, and and people talk about in long-term relationships too, like scheduling sex. Like, oh God, that's gross. I can't imagine. I had a partner not too long ago that said that, and we didn't surpass the length of time where we had to do that. But I remember being like, wait a second, what? And
so wait, he was asking to schedule?
No, he was saying I would never want to be in a relationship where I had to schedule sex, and we were still new, so I was like, okay, it's not an issue clearly with us. But I thought about that. I remember talking to one of my colleagues about it, and she said, you plan a vacation. When you went on vacation, do you enjoy that vacation?
Brilliant.
Yes, and that was just such a spot on analogy.
Right.
It's like, I plan going to dinner with my girlfriends on a Friday night.
So scheduling ain't bad.
Yeah, it's not. Why do we stigmatize scheduling?
Right, for sure.
And that's not for everyone, but if that is part of your path forward, if you're like, we haven't had sex in a while, schedule it. And that could be fun and exciting. You have so much playroom within those parameters of scheduling that allotted time.
Brilliant. Okay. So BDSM, I can relate to BDSM in the context of, I always perceive the person who is initiating as the sub, and I tend to be a bit of a dom, and I only discovered that I like that in a relationship. I didn't know that was something that turned me on, right? And very low frequency, like probably amateur hour, Beaver's family version of Dom. But I did like that, and so therefore it made me not want to initiate, because I believe that was a sub move, right? So hey, I'm the Dom, you come to me, right?
Yeah.
You submit to me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna ask you. So I understood BDSM in that simple context, because I had to understand that I had to ask for what I wanted, and that I had to come to reconcile that Dom as I might think that is, if I don't ask for it, I ain't getting it. So, help us out with BDSM and subs and Doms.
Well, yeah, there's this theory too, by Jack Morin, who wrote The Erotic Mind, famous again, sex therapist. And he says the sub is actually in control. The sub is actually commandeering.
For sure.
And I'll ascribe this to myself. I am what is called an unruly sub. So this is also tied into my, yeah, I know.
Sounds fun.
This is also tied into my, attachment style, which I'm a recovering fearful avoidant. So, I want to be dominated, but I want to fight back. I want them to overrule, to override. So I'll be saying like, no, stop, like, but it's I want them to overrule me. And this definitely crosses over to how I am, interpersonally too. It's like I like to be challenged. I want someone that, puts my perception of self and belief system and challenges that without destroying me, right?
Sure.
So yeah, the unruly sub is a big thing. It's like very nuanced.
Would you put that in your relationship contract when you were about to date someone? Would you say, hey, I need to disclose this, or would you not?
No, I said, well, first of all, I'm pretty open about it, clearly. But sometimes that is the dynamic, and then in other times with the same partner, you want to make love. You want to slow down. You want some real connection.
Sure.
It's not finite, and people get so fixed in their sexual styles. And then they feel we're so into performative sex, right? That we feel like we need to abide by that we set forth. And that's where faking orgasms comes into play. And then, which is again, insidious to the relationship, right? So recognizing that sex and sexual preferences ebb and flow and not holding each other to one prescriptive standard.
Gotcha.
Is so important.
That's very smart, yes. So as we talk about these fun subjects, so far we've covered anal, oral, and BDSM, and the relationship contract. How about consent?
Yes, so consent is the voluntary and enthusiastic agreement to enter a sexual relationship.
Love that.
Yeah, it's so simple, right? And
It's so unique. No one's ever said it like that. Can you hit me with it again? Voluntary and ecstatic?
Voluntary and enthusiastic agreement to enter a sexual relationship.
I love it. Voluntary and enthusiastic. Because passive consent can hurt both people.
Well, passive consent is also real. So when I first heard the word consent and the conversation around consent, this is before I went into sexology, I was like, ugh, I had this aversion to it. Like, you want to ask if you can kiss me? I remember being like, when a man would ask me that, I would get annoyed and turned off.
For sure,
also,
it's like,
you have to ask, then you're probably not reading me right.
Yeah.
You recognize the moment. So there is,
which
passive.
I agree with, by the way.
Yeah.
There is that too.
Again, there's it's nuanced,
if you don't
right?
have the chutzpah to deliver the kiss when you're getting all the signals, there's definitely something wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
100%.
But let's take kissing out of the way. When it comes to sex, and especially trying new things too, or with a new partner, say it's like either first date or second date. There's something very erotic about consent that if you go about it the right way.
Oh wow.
So I'm not sure if you've seen Monsters Ball.
I haven't.
Okay, so there is this ending scene with Halle Berry and Billy Bob Thornton, and they'd already had this kind of primal insane sex when she had just lost her son, and it was, he was kind of like, what do I do with these emotions? It was that she just act out, and was I taking advantage? And at the end of the movie, they're having this really intimate moment. They've clearly fallen in love, and he is in bed with her, and he's just touching her. He's like, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Does that feel good?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? And it's so erotic.
That is erotic.
And you can see this intimacy deepening, between them, and this eye contact being made. So I think it's kind of like another layer of, another like erotic language to ask for consent. It can.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and then your partner's gonna feel very safe, way more connected. And therefore, you're going to be so much more expansive with your sexual landscape, because they're going to be like, holy shit, I'm not used to someone really wanting to read me.
Yeah, because you're on the same team.
Yes.
And when you create safety, then all of a sudden it's your best friend and you playing in a wonderful playground.
Yeah.
And exploration is safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're in the sandbox together. Like, it's just the two of you, right? And it's like...
It's a great sandbox.
It's a great sandbox.
I'm in.
Yeah.
So speaking of great sandboxes, threesomes.
Well, yeah. I have a lot to say on threesomes. I'll start with this. don't ever lead with a threesome in a relationship. Don't lead with saying you'd be down to have a threesome. I see a lot of women making this mistake. And how do you know? How do you feel safe enough to have a threesome? Like, I'd equate that with, the level of enlightenment you need to be in an open relationship or a polyamorous relationship. You have to have those fundamentals of safety and trust and authenticity dialed in before you even introduce that. And then the two people in a relationship have to be in the same place on it. I think that it's best if, you're just giving some nuts and bolts here. If you've been in a relationship for like a minimum of 2 years and it's a secure, stable relationship, that the woman decides to initiate. If that, that's just, it's prescriptive, but it's true.
I mean, is it a sign that there's a problem?
If, in my lived experience, if a man is pushing that out of the gates, non-starter. No, I've made that mistake in relationships before.
And let's say you're in a relationship for 3-4 years. Is one partner coming at you for a threesome just kosher, or is it? I mean, I guess there's many answers to that.
There's many answers to it. I would say if that's a deal breaker, it's not the right relationship, right? And then you have to ask too, it's like, what about this is exciting to you? Like, I've definitely seen where, there's a couple in a relationship and the male partner loves to see his female partner dominating another woman, right? And then so it's like, it's us together still we're a team. And then I've seen relationships and been in relationships where it's clearly about the variety of the other person and the total disregard for, my emotions or the other woman's emotions. So it's again, very nuanced. But if it is something that is a deal breaker and if your partner is pushing you on it, fine.
I'll make a confession here. I've never had a threesome. Interesting. And I've never needed it. I've thought about it on occasion, like imagined it. But I don't know. I always thought that I had the other problem in that I wanted to go as deep as I possibly could with a partner.
Yeah.
And to me, it was like, ultimately it's one orgasm. Mm-hmm. And so you just need one person to get you that one orgasm. Yeah. So I was like, let me see how deep I could go before I need, a third.
Yeah.
But it seems super cool.
Yeah, and I'll say, there's ways of playing with that energy that isn't bringing a third person in, okay? There's ways to safely also gauge if maybe that is something that you're capable of handling between the two of you in a relationship, or if it's not. So, ask your partner how they feel about flirting. Like, I personally love...
Flirting with one another?
No, flirting with other people.
Oh, wow.
Right? Like, I personally love... Like, I'm monogamous. I've always been monogamous. That's what it is for me. But the idea of like going out on a girls' night, then say, a guy approaches you, he's cute, you cultivate that energy where you still feel desirable, but you're still like, I have my person out. Something really hot about that, and same with a man. It's like, oh, he wants to feel like he's still got it. You can play with that energy, but also like, this is my woman. And you can discuss that between the two of you, like, oh, this is what happened tonight. And that's something that you share, and it builds that tension and eroticism. And then so that you don't need to bring a third warm body into the mix to have that same experience.
I mean, again, that is just so hyper honest, right? And people have to be so hyper honest with each other, because I suspect that most of us still flirt. And I remember an episode of Friends, right, where Monica and Jan were talking about flirting with others. So it's super honest, very interesting, and again, another chapter of the book that I hope you cover. Toys,
yes. This is funny. There's a story comes to mind right away. I've had a couple close male friends that have asked me about this. They're like, I like to think I'm pretty open-minded and a safe, good guy, but I brought out, vibrator with women recently, and their response to it's been like polarized and crippled. And it again tells you a lot about someone out of the gate. If you're a male bringing out a vibrator on your first sexual encounter, a woman is going to spiral, right?
Right.
You have to have this disclaimer conversation.
Yeah.
But I do believe in a new relationship, over 50%, I think it's like 53% of women can't orgasm without a toy, a vibrator.
Yeah, I suspect wholeheartedly that men should not feel intimidated or like threatened by this. Like, you're trying to bring in each other the highest possible point, right? Like the highest possible orgasm or the highest possible frequency in this team sexual experience.
Yeah, the thing that makes it, in my experience as a woman, slightly more challenging too is because there is that spontaneity in sex, right?
Sure.
And you don't want it to feel contrived all the time. So it is not in the sex shouldn't be about the orgasm. That should not be the goal every single time. We have masturbation for that. But creating that safe environment where it's like, yeah, this is the baseline, that's there, but also recognizing that sex is embodied in different ways for different moods, different times of the month, of the year, of the week, of whatever. But yeah, it's a partner that isn't comfortable with sex toys will tell you a lot about that person's comfort level and everything in life.
And I think that that's a superpower that you're giving people when you're saying take away the orgasm. I mean, I'm lucky that my partner is, she's blessed in that area, but I do know that taking that away and your advice to do that is a real amazing opportunity to explore without pressure.
Yes.
It takes all the pressure out of the situation for new couples like us that have been together 5 years. We have no worries about that, but I know that that's very relevant.
Yeah, and also recognizing that, anorgasmia, so the inability to reach orgasm, is mostly psychosomatic. So, I'll use myself as an example. I was performative for so long that now when I really am emotionally, bond with someone, I can't just orgasm, It's like I have these emotional feelings which I'm not accustomed to, and I'm used to being performative. So to totally relinquish control, I'm unable to. I spent this time, feeling safe by not being fully uninhibited.
Right.
So it's
Julia Roberts not kissing.
Yeah, exactly. Like Julia Roberts. Yeah. So it's like I could control the situation by not giving you my orgasm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then also, conversely, men think that there's something wrong with me because I can't get it up or I ejaculate too soon. It's never that you're either too attracted to the partner or not attracted enough. In fact, the opposite is usually true. Like if a man is having issues, maintaining interaction, that is like my experience with orgasm. It's because he's feeling a lot of things and he feels this pressure to perform when he really be emotionally connecting with someone.
100%. I think we forget how important in the moment it is to, as you said, to also be erotic in the mind.
Yes.
Like, I think that if there's performance anxiety or something like that, that complimenting or like dirty talk are those things, because I do believe that men have anxieties and I do believe men get in their heads. And I think that the minute you start making love to each other's minds as well, that's a superpower as well.
Yeah, which goes back to the vulnerability thing. And like Dr. Ruth, RIP, said, when it comes to sex, the most important 6 inches is between the ears.
Right, 100%.
And that's so true.
100%.
It's so true. I think this is more common for women, but I'll tell you that if you're not in the mood, if you're not aroused, sex can actually be painful too.
Sure.
So you could be doing the exact same thing, the exact same act, and it can go from feeling extremely pleasure-filled and incredible to like, what is this foreign object in my body? And that goes with feeling unembodied, so not being in tune and in alignment with yourself emotionally and physically, psychologically.
So we're going to talk about the importance of sexual health testing for a minute. But before we did that, monogamy, polygamy, sexual orientation, these hot subjects in the TikTok culture, but in your experience, does monogamy work?
Yes, I've seen monogamy work far more than I've seen open relationships or polyamory work.
Wow.
Because there's something so magical about being in a world where we have an abundance of options and choice, and deciding, it's like the high fidelity thing, we can run the algorithm with a multitude of people for the rest of our lives.
For sure.
But that's exhausting.
Right.
Deciding on one person, aligning on values, and going to the depths of commitment with that person, and acknowledging it's going to ebb and flow, it's going to be messy, but realizing it's going to be like that with anyone, right? You're going to interface, you're going to interact with those same challenges with any partner and any new partner. So, to sustain long-term happiness and satisfaction, the studies show that monogamy is conducive to that.
And I think that the thing that fascinates me about the discussion is that I think that if you're going to have a successful monogamous relationship many years into the future, you have to figure out a way to have the kink, to have the sex, to have the communication. And I think that that's where so many relationships are struggling with right now.
And then it again comes down to that leap of faith and trying new things. I will say 7 years into a relationship, it's like, well, you should start mimicking the environment, the dynamic that you did when you first started dating. Okay, so again, with that insatiable curiosity, like go through the motions of dating your partner again, because they're likely a different person than when you met them.
Can you do that as a game?
Yeah. Oh, I love turning everything into a game. Trust me. Like that's why I like
first date again.
Yeah.
Year 7.
You could get again like playful. Getting really playful with it is the key. Keeping things lighthearted is the key.
So it's worth trying to stay in your monogamous relationship 7 years in, because doing the whole cycle again is going to lead you right back to the same place anyway.
Yeah, that's what I've seen. Yeah. Again, that's not like a finite answer. That's not a fixed answer, but absolutely.
I mean, I think the reason it resonates is because we all believe that to be true. And for whatever reason, we all end up in the same place. All of us end up in that same place of having to actually do the work and have the frequency of the relationship that you aspire to.
Yeah, I spoke about this earlier, but Dan Blazarian's recently come out and said that he believes that monogamy is the only real path forward to happiness, and he has slept with thousands of women, right? And he's like, what I landed on.
That was an unbelievable example.
And I can say the same. Like I haven't slept with thousands of people, but like I can say the same. It took me that to realize like I'm landing in the same place. It's kind of like Groundhog Day over and over and over again.
So it's worth, for the people at home who are watching, and let's say they're 49, 51, right? They've been in a relationship, they're 51 that I should stay in and do the work, but 49, they're out. So any one little thing could teeter them over. Dan Bilzerian saying that monogamy is the only way tells me that it is worth the work.
Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately too, what I want to do my dissertation on how extreme promiscuity can lead to enlightened monogamy. But a lot of people that are kind of in the mid zone, generally, most people that have had maybe 5, 10, and 15 partners, they're kind of always, the grass is always greener. The grass is always greener.
Sure.
So,
I tend to believe that as well, which is why I'm in such a relationship that I chose. So sexual health testing. And why is regular sexual health testing important?
I mean, the fundamental reason is everyone thinks they're invincible, right? They're invincible until they're not. And I kind of feel like the millennials in my generation were raised with all this sex ed, but we didn't actually pertain that to ourselves. And then we're seeing the effects on fertility and, with cancer, with pelvic inflammatory disease. And So it's not just when you have the STD, gonorrhea, and chlamydia being the dominant ones in today's day and age, but the long-term side effects, if you don't treat that, are extremely, extremely dangerous.
So you have a new partnership, get a couple of PlaySafe kits, test 1 urine sample, $99, and then play away.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to if someone is able to be that open with you going into it, then that tells you who they are as a person, how they're going to engage with you sexually and relationally. And also, if you probably shouldn't be having sex with the person that doesn't want to get tested if you are asking them to get tested or to share that conversation and share your results.
As we start to head towards the end of this, how do you, I want to clean up a few subjects that I think the audience will find interesting. Mismatched libidos. How do people deal with that?
Yeah. As soon as possible, address that elephant in the room. I would take an inventory of your past relationships and what you've been like, what your patterns are going into any new relationship, and determine what sex means to you, right? Because going back to the erotic blueprint, most men are predominantly sexual. So the way to their hearts is through sex. There are also women that are predominantly sexual, and they ascribe that to love. And being rejected sexually is being rejected emotionally too.
100%.
So
I also relate to that in the sense of like, I do a lot of good. Mm-hmm. I'm a good boy. I do so much good, right? Like I'll clean, I'll do the laundry, I'll just do so much. And then in my brain, the math, the reward is sex.
Yeah, and the thing is, like I said earlier, in terms of the keeping score thing, it's like women can't withhold sex. Like they can't be like, oh, you're objectifying me in a relationship. That's insane. We've got to take out the trash. We've got to wash our faces at night. We've got to brush our teeth. We have to have sex in our relationships.
Okay, but what if there's a scenario where, let's say, the woman does not want to have sex with a man, either works or not? And is that okay then for a sexual surrogate or sexual go to a sex worker? When do you go, hey, and how do you do that?
After you have that conversation, you have to try having that conversation more than once. And then you have to,
so it's not just, hey, by the way, what do you think?
I guess I can go to a sex worker because, yeah. Oh, she said not tonight, so I can fuck her. That's not the way it works.
And more than once.
Yeah.
You have to talk about more.
Yeah, exactly. And then if that's not working, then that's when you address the subject of bringing in a sex therapist or sex coach, right? And if you're still being rejected, then really think about your integrity and your requirements in a long-term partnership, because maybe that's telling you that you cannot be in this relationship. If you would rather be honest and you want a partner, or maybe your needs are being met across the board and your partner is actually indifferent towards where you get your sexual needs fulfilled. I've seen that happen too. That's how I see that kind of.
So are you, by the way, so at that point they should go to coralosborne.com.
Yes.
Can you spell that for us?
Coral Osborne, Osborne.
I like what you did there.
Oh, it's brutal. I try
no one will forget that. Coralosborne.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But to answer your question about sexual surrogacy, so there's a vast difference between sexual surrogacy and sex workers. And I find there's no way of me telling this, but the best sexual surrogates would have definitely been former sex workers, because as a sex worker, you learn to attune and intuit, clients' needs, right? In the sexual surrogacy space, it's legal, but it's very messy, and it can be very predatory on the client side and on the provider side.
What is sexual surrogacy then? Because maybe we don't know what it is.
Right. So sexual surrogacy is when you bring in a surrogate partner to work on intimacy and sexual issues. So they're actually...
Are they having sex?
They can. Yeah. They go from, it can be anything from just non-erotic physical touch to eye contact to then, sexual play to intercourse. But a therapist has to recommend that sexual surrogate. You can't just bypass that.
To make it legal.
Yes,
Gotcha.
And it's still messy again. So
in its legality.
And you can't ever really test for ethics, right? But so if you're looking for a sexual surrogate and this work is so fragile, then not only should you get a recommendation from your therapist, which you legally have to, but you should do your due diligence on the provider as well. Like search the name, get more testimonials, because it is a very fragile space. And I don't recommend it for desire. It actually would not be recommended flat out for desire discrepancy. That's where the sex worker comes in after you've gone through these other chains of command. Sexual surrogates work predominantly with individuals. It's great for physical disabilities, for learning disabilities, for any neurodivergence. It's an integral part of that work. And then there's also sexological body work, and that is a little more flexible. So you don't need a therapist to work with a sexological body worker, but a sexological body worker does not have sex. So they can do it also.
So is that like what body worker means internal?
Yes, but also you do somatic exercises and you can have erotic touch, but it does not lead to intercourse.
Okay.
Yeah.
The individual who is in a sexless marriage has to decide whether they solve with personal growth and communication, perhaps end the relationship.
What can you live with?
Yeah.
What can you live with and what can't you? Like, is this, you're only as sick as your secrets, right? So is this shame chipping away at you every day and that you feel like your partner does not have a clue who you are? Or are you okay being boxed in this way and in this monogamous relationship or in this primary relationship, and then just having transactional sex over here after you've gone through all these other chains of command? And also, how would you feel if your partner found out? Like, would that ruin your life? If it would ruin your life, do you really want to risk it? Right. You gotta weigh all these things out. It's not one size fits all.
And I find that to be wholly true in that I am overly honest. And my partner and most of my business partners also would agree that, that over honesty usually results in 1 or 2% pain in the outset, but then I don't experience the 80-90% had I not been totally honest.
Totally.
Right? So everything that you advocate, I personally have learned to be true.
Yeah.
Like that honesty has held to be true for me.
People think that, honesty, again, I like to say radical honesty is very polarizing. People aren't used to it, right? I've definitely found that in my life. And what it does though is it weeds out the people that aren't meant for you. Like, because eventually someone's going to find that out, or you're going to reach this place where you want to be seen, and that facade only works to a certain extent. So if you lead with your authentic self and that radical honesty, you're going to attract other people that do the same. And so you're only getting that upper echelon, which is 100%. What you want.
100%.
So it's like, I knew all of this. I'd read all the language around it, the literature around it, but I didn't understand it until I went through it myself.
It actually creates a new problem, which is if you're not around people that are at that frequency, I find energy loss.
Yeah.
If you can't be so authentic and present with each other and in this state of, we call it light spinning, where I can send some light to you and you can send it back, and they're either in a state of some other frequency that isn't at this level, I find energy loss.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of wild to take an inventory of the people that have come into my life and exited my life since I've started doing this work, and the alignment that's happened within that. And once you see, you can't unsee.
Yeah.
Once you lead with this, you can't regress.
Yeah, like once you've had out of the world sex, you can't not.
No.
You can't just not do it anymore.
That's standard, and the intimacy too. Once you're like, oh, now I'm not just playing the validation game. I can't just play this like cat and mouse and playing it cool, because you're like, holy shit, I've had this experience, and that's the bar. That's my standard now.
Coral, what an incredible pleasure it was to have you here today. I want to make sure everyone out there goes to coralosborne.com. That's Osborne with an E.com.
Yes. I'll also say my Instagram, at the Unreal Coral Osborne. That's where I post a lot of my content, and I'm constantly, conducting my own research and posting about the psychosexual analysis of individuals and tips.
Incredible stuff, by the way.
I'm always learning, and I think that's just imperative. Like, I am by no means an expert, but I'm never going to stop learning.
I invite the audience, if they're having needs or issues, to reach out to Coral Osborne at coralosborne.com, relationship and intimacy coach. I know that everything that you're saying here makes incredible sense, and I understand how this could be very helpful for someone that might need coaching, whether it's as it relates to intimacy or the relationship. Not only are you a wonderful person, but you're extremely talented. I found that all your online content was on another level. Like, it wasn't, clickbait. It wasn't, dirty for the sake of being dirty, but it was actually helping me have insight into the psychology of these mindsets or fetishes, or, as simple as we discussed, the anal thing.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is about this. And it was presented in such a scholastic and integral way. So thank you for that. And thank you to Randox and the PlaySafe kit. Again, $99 to test 9 STDs. It's an at-home kit, 1 urine sample. And ideally, you're doing these tests before, but if you happen to do the test after, the RNA shows up 48 hours after your last sexual encounter. And come in and get an 80 blood test baseline plus, set your baseline, add a protocol, and then retest 90 days later to make sure that you are pro-aging. As you know, we did the blueprint study. So Randox did Brian Johnson's study there, where thousands of people did a baseline, added the Brian Johnson protocol and interventions, and then retested 90 days later to measure those 80 biomarkers. So thanks again, Coral. Incredible talk. I feel like we should have a round 2 soon, right? I mean, that was so powerful. I do hope you write that book. Just make sure to thank me somewhere in it.
You'll write the foreword.
Oh, yes, I'll do that. And see you next time.
Thank you.